something you learned? Were you born an entrepreneur?
You got to start small.
I have not allowed being a woman to hold me back.
Credibility is not just making money, it's about making sure that people trust what you're doing.
Law practice is not only about going to court, it's about advice.
It's very difficult to hire somebody who's not motivated and then make them motivated.
One of the things that I'm known for is integrity.
They have to see you as a person of integrity.
Welcome to the Executive Lounge. I'm Inshira Adam. Hello and welcome to the Executive Lounge with me, Inshira Ado. It's good to be back on your screens and to bring you the best minds as we do on the Executive Lounge. And you do know this is your thought leadership show that brings you the insights and the experiences of men and women who have scaled the daunting heights of either running corporations, businesses, or growing their own. My guest today is a man that is worth celebrating, because he combined for many years a top corporate job and farming. And today, he is the best farmer, national best farmer, 2019, James Boateng. You're welcome to the Executive Lounge.
Thank you very much, Ishra.
How did you start out hoping to be Farmer of the Year?
To confess, no, I didn't. But I guess that given my tutelage in the corporate world, having spent about 32 years, time spent with Coca-Cola, time spent with British American Tobacco, Cadbury's, American Kraft Foods, name it. I even did a little bit of work with Bayer Pharmaceuticals. So having been exposed, I thought that if I was farming, then I needed to apply the standards and make sure that everything was in place. I therefore had the intention of running that farm as a business. Okay. And so anything that had to do with all the standards of this world, certification and all of that, were the things that we were really hoping for. Along the line, government sent some guys out to come and check on the farm, and they thought we had the best farm. So I would say that it came along, but I guess that if we hadn't done the right things, there was no way we were going to win among the millions of other farmers in the country.
So for you, it's a case of the accolade and the celebration today is a byproduct of doing the right things and putting the systems in place.
Absolutely.
Let's get to know you a little bit. So you were born in Nkranza.
Yes.
Schooled mainly in Nkranza, then came to Presbyterian Boys in Accra.
Yes.
And then started your career. Went to University of Ghana, started your career.
Yes.
And then you find yourself finally back in Nkranza. So you've kind of done
I've done a
full circle.
And I'm really back, which is very interesting. I just want to mention a couple of things. We probably will have some takeouts. Like most people at my age, 60, who have had such a background, life has really been checkered. It's been good, it's been bad, and all of that. But I guess that I had my lessons very early in life. Okay. I had, a mixed parentage. I say that my mom was calm and very philosophical, stark illiterate. She's still alive at 97 years. Okay. And my dad was a disciplinarian. Tight Presby discipline. Wow. Okay. In the end, even before I could get out of Nkranza to go to Presec, I failed. I failed very miserably, and that was my first lesson of life, that little things matter. I feel simply because those were the days where you had to go to an interview. To be interviewed, you had passed, but to be interviewed before you got to secondary school. Right. And I failed to observe simple etiquette. I didn't greet a panel, so they failed me. And had to stay at home for one more year before I passed again. So these things really helped to shape me up, that pay attention to detail and don't disregard the little things of life because it might cost you in the end.
I mean, not greeting could cost. If only we knew that, we'd be greeting everywhere we went. Wow. Yes, so, I mean, you mentioned your mom being philosophical and your father being a strict disciplinarian. How does that combination, how has that impacted on who you've become?
I think it's really, really been the bedrock of who I am today. Of course, my life has been shaped also by my experiences in the various corporate world. I mean, corporate has a way of shaping you up. You either shape up or you don't survive. It's as simple as that. Yeah. And having done 30 years, it's impacted. However, I mentioned my mom because she painted 2 pictures to me very early in my life. Wow. 2 pictures of success and failure. And she demonstrated this by always pointing, because I had an uncle who was tapping palm wine in Nkransa. Palm wine tapping is a profession, but it's not a great one. Yeah. So my mom would always point to this uncle and say, you know how he ended up like this? Even though she was carrying the palm wine and selling. And anytime I left school and went there, she would point to this uncle and say, if you don't do the right things, you could end up tapping palm wine, okay? So to her, that's a picture that's not so successful. Then there was this professor, the first professor to come from Kransa. I think he was a professor of archaeology. He had this little car, white car. We all adore this car. And anytime the car passes, I'll freeze. And then my mother said, okay, that's a picture of success. He worked hard. He went to school. He was God-fearing. He was disciplined. So you have 2 pictures. Whether I'm alive or I'm dead, just remember these 2 pictures. And she kept telling me that really in life, who you want to be is really in your hands. And this was a stark illiterate. All right? So later, so I spent my early years with this woman, a very peasant, simple farmer. And she kept counseling, a great counselor. My dad didn't have a lot of time for that. He was a politician. He was a big-time farmer. He was always on the move. But he made sure that we got education, okay? So I guess that a combination of the 2 really shaped my life, my early years.
So you got the nurturing that you needed from mom.
Absolutely.
But you made this remark that she was an illiterate and yet philosophical. And I'd like to get your thoughts on, see, our society tends to refer to those without formal education as illiterates. But it turns out that your mom actually had tons of knowledge, and that doesn't come by chance. It comes from some level of education.
Absolutely.
Where do you see our society in terms of the space we give people to be expressive if they had not had formal schooling as we know it?
I think, Inshra, you've hit a point. I could have disregarded the advice from my mom. As I said, she couldn't read and write. Probably that's the best way to put it. Yeah. But she was literate in her own sense. And I guess that my grandma lived long enough, so I saw her. And I realized that this was quite generational, so they tended to pass some of these values on. And I happened to be alive to see it, because I didn't live with my dad, who had a very fast life. I lived with them, and in their deprivation and all of that, what they could hold on to was values. Okay? We moved so far away as Africans, and particularly as Ghanaians. See the way I introduced her as a stark illiterate. Okay? Now I'm changing my definition. Yeah. And I'm saying that she just couldn't read and write, but she was literate in her own right. So I guess that, and I've heard a few things about the Chinese. Their natural and traditional values are some of the things, and I hear about Japanese, some of the things that are driving them. So there's modernization, but you should not lose your core traditional values. And I think these are things that even as intellectuals and people like us should be focusing on.
Borrowing from the 2 pictures or images that your mom counseled you with. So this professor obviously went to school for a long time, got a job and got a car. Juxtaposing that over the departure from the values that have kept our society. Today, people come out of university with under 2 years of experience, and they want to own big cars. What do you think can create the right paradigm shift we need to go back to the values that gave us hope, patience, and dedication to a cause, knowing that at the end of the day, we will arrive and be successful.
Fantastic. And I think that I would answer that, but I would like to link that a bit to some of the challenges I had in the corporate life.
Fantastic.
The fact that we're not traditional enough, the fact that we don't value, and we lost most of our values, tends to pose a lot of challenge to people who are managing at the top.
Okay.
Because you're talking of honesty, you're talking of hard work, you're talking of all of that. People want fast life. They want to be successful overnight, okay? So it is very important. And I think that in my view, I mean, see what I've done. 32 years of corporate life. I've seen it.
15 of that was farming as well.
And was farming. I've actually shrugged it off with the Philip Morrises of this world. They were competition. In another parts of the world, I really succeeded and took shares from Philip Morris and all of that. So I'll say that in terms of the corporate world, I've been adequately exposed. However, when I retired, because of my exposure initially, I've decided to go back. Now, I'm back in Cranston, not just because of the farm. It's a business. But just to go back to the roots and to try to admire and really pay attention to some of these values that we've lost, especially in the big cities. And I think that I would urge, especially those of us who have Western education, to really reorient and go back. Go back to the family values. You don't necessarily have to be physical in the village, but we all have family values, and I think that we should be paying much more attention to that.
Wow. That's an interesting thought. And I think it also played out in how you have built the farm. You said that for you, you believed that getting the right certification, getting the right standardization to ensure that your output was globally competitive, which is very important, made all the difference. And I think that we can say that mindset is something that was has been grounded in the values that you were raised with. Tell me a little bit about farming.
Yeah.
The image of a typical farmer, as we would know and have been shown, is not one that's successful.
Yes. Yes. And it is so, again, because of how we approach farming. Most of us approach farming from the point of view of not it being a business. In fact, the perception is that when you fail and you have nothing to do,
Then you go and farm.
Then you go and farm. Again, it even goes back to our school systems and all of that. When you're being punished, you go and weed. So it goes into your head that farming is punishment. But that is not true. What has made all the difference for us, really, is the fact that I started off thinking of farming as a business, but just not thinking, but also doing things that businesses do. So I started off by, first of all, building business plans. So we have a strategic plan for the farm. We had it way back 18 years ago. How to acquire the land, what type of land. I got soil scientists to come and test the land and tell us what will grow here and what will not grow here. So we did all of that. The kind of things we do in the corporate world that we take for granted, I thought should apply in the farm. And then after we've done that, sourcing the kind of materials we even planted, we gave thought to it. So we went to the right sources. We didn't just pick any seeds and grow. So for example, I realized that there was a lot of destruction, deforestation. So we refixed the forest. So that's how come that part of the farm is a 300-acre teak farm, which we don't intend to cut because it's definitely fixed the ecosystem. We get more rain on the farm. The 6-kilometer-mile farm gets more rain than the average surrounding. And so we're benefiting. So we set off thinking about all of that before we even started planting anything which we thought was commercial.
Wow.
So if anybody started by doing this, and as I'm talking, I'm sure somebody will say, you're lucky. You had 30 years exposure. I'm a poor farmer and all of that. What surprises me in life really is that if somebody wants to go and sell in a container, a kiosk by the roadside, the person will sit down and think a bit about it. Where am I going to place the container? What am I going to sell? Is it gari or sugar? And who will buy and all of that? That's planning. Person is doing a bit of planning in the head. How come that when we want to farm, we get up and because we hear that the price of tomatoes are high, everybody starts planting tomatoes? No. So everybody does some planning in business. And if the same philosophy and mentality can be translated, no matter how small, can be translated into farming, I guess that will make a lot of headway.
We're going to take a short break, and when we come back, the Executive Lounge continues with my guest, James Boateng, National Best Farmer. Welcome back to the Executive Lounge with me and Shira Ado. Today, my guest is the National Best Farmer, James Boateng. A man who doesn't look anywhere near the 60 years. And you're going on to 61 later this year.
Absolutely, I am.
Right. But so we're going to go back to the secret to looking, this young and sprightly. But you studied at the University of Ghana Business School.
Yes.
And then you went into the corporate world. What one key lesson would you say you learned early on in the corporate world?
Okay. I think my very early lessons had to do with the fact that I realized that, because you see, if I pull back a bit, we all left college in those days feeling very good. We have a degree from Legon and all of that. But then when I started a corporate life, I realized that it wasn't quite like that, especially with serious multinationals. You do not manage from the top. And so I needed to roll my sleeves, and I needed to get somewhere down there. I got to know very quickly that whereas as a manager, you needed to have the strategic stretch, obviously, step back, have kind of a vision, know where you're going, keep checking from time to time, and make sure that you're not dropping off. Otherwise, you come back and look at your strategy and all of that. You need to have all of that. But it gets to a time when you need to be seriously operational and get down there. And I realized that if you needed to build a team, then whilst you're leading them strategically, you also needed to be operational. And this came very quickly to me when I started my career with British American Tobacco.
Wow. And is this something that you'd say works in the farm situation? I mean, it's easy for farming to be looked at as a non-corporate business.
Yeah.
But a lot of your work, later on in your corporate life was in the food space.
Absolutely.
Consumables. And they're byproducts of farming.
Yes. I mean, it really translates very nicely into a farm. And the way this happens is that, in fact, whereas I was managing that farm from a distance, because if you are a CEO and very senior executive for about 18 years of your 30-year career, then you're not going to find all the time to be running down to Nkransa for your farms. Some of the times I was even outside the country and there was very little I could do. However, when you are managing strategically, you need to value talent. You need to pay attention to talent. And I recognize that there are people who have specialized knowledge to manage a farm. Besides the technical side, which is the agronomy, knowing which grows where, which chemical to apply, when you can tell. Sometimes it even comes down to telling when a fruit is ripe or not. You need some knowledge. I realized I couldn't do all of that, so I needed to employ the right talent. So I got some right people. So all the way back to recruiting for the farm, I thought that was pretty strategic, and that's how it succeeded. It's not just recruiting, but I put in the right people strategies to be able to enable the guys do the right thing, and especially the management team of 3 who were managing the rest of the workforce. I made sure that they had the right cognitive skills, they had the right knowledge, they had been to school and studied in the right fields, And then at the end of the day, they also had the right people relationship skills, which is extremely important, because if you're managing a workforce of over 100 on the farm, then your people skills must come to play. So I guess that whereas I did not set up an assessment center in recruiting and say, let's simulate a work situation and let's get assessors to come, I didn't do that. But I borrowed from some knowledge from there, and I got a couple of people who were agricultural extension officers to help me to interview these people. And at the end of the day, there was consensus. And once we got the right people, and I motivated and made sure that I rewarded them properly, they were on the go, and they managed the farm for most of the time. In fact, I have been physically present on that farm for just 2 years.
Wow. So for the 18-year life of the farm, you've been physically present in 2 years.
Yes.
So in all of this time, you essentially gave the destiny of the farm and handed that to people who you had hired. Of course, through the processes you had put in place, you were sure they had the right skill.
Yes.
But how important was it for you to give them room?
I noticed that, obviously, if I was going to be controlling, extremely controlling, then I was going to lose the investment. It was not an easy decision, because too much room also, opens up for all sorts of things, fraud and all of that. So yes, definitely I created a space for them, and I gave them bounds as to where they could go and where they could not go. For example, if I was going to make any commitment, financial commitment beyond a certain point, I had made arrangements with the banks, some of the local banks, and they could not draw beyond a certain point. These are all very basic things that we take for granted in corporate multinational. You have SAP systems which are limiting you and they're keeping you beyond.
Automating a lot of the decisions.
All of that, and online you are stopped. You are a CEO, but that's where you are. You can't go beyond that. That decision must be made by somebody above you and all of that. So I applied a bit of this. And so whereas the guys were empowered and they had a space to operate, at the same time, we needed to put in some controls. And I guess that's what really got the guys running and doing the right things. In terms of resourcing, I made sure that they had the right resources to be able to do their jobs. If somebody needed a motorbike, then the person needed it. The person needed a pickup to be able to run, because you just cannot manage that farm walking. It's a big enterprise. So we gave the right resources. And then I made sure that anytime I had the opportunity to be in Ghana, I spent at least a weekend with them. So I spent the weekend on the farm, work with them before I left. I was for two things: to motivate them, and also to make sure that the appropriate checks and the little governance things are working. So basically, that's how I managed to give them space and empower them, and at the same time, keep them in check.
So farming in itself is not just, digging a hole and putting some seeds in there. It can actually be an enterprise. Would you say that's been the missing link in the levels at which our agriculture performance has been?
I think it's been the missing link. And unfortunately, even when state has attempted to go into farming, state has failed. It's not just individuals. So we can't say, okay, individuals are not well organized, they're not educated enough and all of that. A whole enterprise of state sometimes fails because the mentality sometimes is something else rather than business. Now, if it is business, then it should be tackled as such. So it's really been the missing link here. And I'm just hoping that some of the little things we're doing, transferring lessons and learning from some of the basic things in corporate life, not complicated, transferring some of these learnings onto agricultural platforms should begin to point the way to make our agricultural sector interesting. So
the complete value chain of agriculture, particularly if we would look at your experience with Kraft, Cadbury, even British American Tobacco, this is all from raw material to finished goods. How do you see us bridging the gap where not only are we farming and exporting, but we're growing our own multinationals here that are processing and delivering end-to-end products from the agri sector?
Right. Big lesson I picked from corporate multinational. You don't supply when there's no demand. Simple as that. Yeah, absolutely. So all the enterprise resource, ERP systems, and the sales and operational planning processes and all of that. Golden rule, if there's no demand, don't produce. Simply don't do it. Now, it is possible to create our own manufacturing, processing, and all of that. Even integrate it back to agriculture, like what I'm doing. Integrate it, get into value adding, to check waste, and to be able to preserve and add value and all of that. Beautiful. However, how much demand really do we have? And I think that there are many of these enterprises, and especially attempts at processing and manufacturing, which have started without careful thinking into how much demand. Sometimes there's demand, but is the demand sustainable? Sometimes the demand is just transient. You don't see it visibly. But if you trend properly and you look at your forecasting, you realize that that demand is going to be real rather than transient. So these are things that I have picked from the agricultural sector, which I think should apply all the way into, from the corporate sector rather, into the agricultural sector. Yeah. And sort of moving it forward, integrating it forward into manufacturing. For example, in Cadbury, Ghana, when I took over the company way back in 2005, if you work out the financial numbers, the company's turnover was just around 5 million Ghana cedis. Everybody thought that was fine. But I had seen real big corporates, and I kept on asking, why is it so small? So we set out to do the right things, and we started working on just 3 major pillars. Okay. Cadbury was underfunded by the group. That's Cadbury Ghana, underfunded by the group because nobody will put money where they're not getting returns. The staff, all the organizational viruses were there, backbiting, little pilfering, all of that. People were picking even parts from machines. And the company was just making 5 million Ghana cedis. And everybody said, okay, we grow cocoa in Ghana, we buy cocoa in Ghana, we get the best cocoa beans in Ghana, let that factory run. And it's just there. We have a footprint. Then I joined and I started asking questions. And I was told that it's really been a leakage, terrible leakage. Now, what did we do? What I set out to do was just to give myself a period of 3 years. Then I started asking some hard questions. At the end of the day, when I did the assessments and the review, I realized that if we fixed 3 things in the organization, the company will move forward. Wow. So the first thing we did was to fix leadership. And I'm not talking about hierarchical leadership where somebody sits at the top and then the person is there and all of that. I'm talking about contemporary leadership, which looks at competencies. You know, that mindset of leadership is what I'm talking about. Where if you are even in a subordinate down there and you have anything to do with any human being, you are a leader. And you are supposed to demonstrate some competencies such as being accountable. Even if you're a sweeper, you're accountable. So accountability was one of the positive indicators. And then you needed to demonstrate positive aggression. Then you needed to have the right values. So if you delivered 1,000 tons and you don't have values for people and the community, then you're out. Even how to manage time. Okay? So those kinds of leadership is what really I started looking at. Now, in terms of developing people, we even went all the way back to just cut off one-on-one interviews like I'm doing with you. You know, we went to assessment centers, simulated work situations, and then we sat back and we looked at who had the influencing skills, who had natural leadership skills, who was just a crowd pleaser and all of that. So we were very, very serious because For me, it was like a personal philosophy to try to get this business running. So leadership, I looked at that. And we were bold to go into some of the major competitors, and we were able to recruit people from there. Okay? Then we came to look at strategy. What I realized at the time for Cadbury was that it lacked enough strategy. The strategy was not strong enough. Because you could not really synchronize demand and supply. So sometimes, whereas we are running this line and producing so much because we have so much sugar and milk, we realized that we didn't really have orders and all of that. Very basic things. So I put in a very simple enterprise resource system, sales and operational planning system, which simply said what I said, golden rule. If you don't have
no demand, you don't produce.
Simple. And then we came to what I call systems. Just 3 things. So the third one is systems. So we started looking at all the systems and everything from the people systems, recruitment systems, appraisal systems, reward systems, succession planning, all those things, very basic. And then from there, we had to look at even operational systems. There are systems, very basic systems, which should govern every manufacturing enterprise. Distribution systems. Once we fix these, and my son as if it's a very big thing, but the moment we were able to fix these things, we started seeing the results coming. As sidekicks to the major initiatives, which are leadership, strong corporate strategy, systems, we started delisting brands. We started relaunching brands, depending on the potential of the brands. And at the time I was leaving Cadbury, I left in the middle of 2016, the corporate sales, that's Cadbury Ghana only, corporate sales had jumped to 100 million Ghana cedis.
Wow.
All right? All in 7 years. And in 2015, Cadbury Ghana was adjudged the fastest growing business in the whole of the Cadbury world, out of 90 markets where we operate. So these are things that we cannot take for granted. I didn't have a choice. I needed to do it because I work for a corporate body which believes in this. But the question is, why can't we transfer and translate some of this into other spheres of our lives, national lives, even agriculture? The little I've been able to do, we're making money from that farm. We've been recognized as the best farm after just 2 years of my direct involvement.
You raise an interesting point, that why aren't we borrowing all these lessons and transferring it into even our national life? And this is a picture that every time it's painted, it really hurts, that we sit on a continent that produces and has in abundance 3/4 of the world's raw materials, and yet we're the poorest. You've demonstrated that we have the brain power to fix our problems.
Yep.
But it works in corporate, but not in national world, in the national space. What do you think ought to be done to leverage the lessons and the skill set within the corporate world that's doing well on our national issues?
I think it goes back to one word, and that is discipline.
Wow.
That's discipline. In the corporate world, if you promise to deliver 100 units and you deliver 120 units, you are asked to explain, even when you've exceeded. Some corporate will say, how come? Did you under forecast? Or were there extraneous factors that helped you to achieve? If you get less, obviously you're going to explain.
That's right.
If we can adopt some of these things, which for me is just simple discipline, it will help us. For example, most of the corporate entities, the corporate multinationals, have what they call PIP,
performance improvement
absolutely.
Programs. Yes.
So, and it's simple. If you're not performing, you're not going to stay, and it doesn't matter.
Before they let you go, they'll put you on the PIP.
Put you on the PIP
to give you a chance to improve.
It's right. You know, you're familiar with it, and they give you the chance. And when the time is up, you either stay or you go. Yeah. And if you're going to go, you will know that you're going to go weeks before the time comes. Are we able to do this? If we can play down a bit of the national politics. Yeah, we need politics to survive as a nation, but if we can play down, especially when it comes to very critical sectors of the economy, and rather let some of these areas where there should be strict discipline and everything should be performance-based and everything should be resource-oriented, I guess that we will get there. If politics gets in the way of some of the beautiful things I'm talking about in the corporate world, it's going to mar it. Because then you can't discipline when you must discipline. Somebody is going to question you, I have overachieved. Why are you questioning me? But there's the need to question you.
Because there are lessons to be learned.
There are lessons for subsequent planning. So until we can get there, and I guess that maybe initially in the conversation we started talking about our values. When we were kids, everybody was held accountable. Everybody. If you were the old lady in the house, you had your role. The old man had his role. If you were a kid, you knew where you belonged. And you knew that there are family value sets, things that you dare not break. And if you broke, the consequences were there. Not very different from how corporate has shaped themselves up. But we've lost it. And if we can go back and pick some of these things and apply them, then I believe that we can begin to get on the track of recovery as a nation.
Wow. Thanks so much, James. But we're going to take another break and go into the final leg of our conversation. And I'm already thinking one episode is not enough to plunder your brain for the real lessons and practical wisdom that you share. And for you, stay tuned. We'll be back after this break. Welcome back to the Executive Lounge with me, Inshira Ado, and my guest, National Best Farmer, James Boateng. It's been an awesome time so far, and we only have another, 15 minutes to wrap this conversation up, and I promise you I will go to the farm and I will bring you stories from there. But there's so much to learn that I'm actually bereft of ideas right now. But I want us to focus on two things. So in the developed economies, farming as a sector, or agriculture as a sector, employs a very small fraction of the population.
That's true.
But it's a very influential sector.
Yep.
From the lessons you've learned from your life in corporate and running the farm full-time now, where do we make that transition as a country?
Right.
Where we are able to get more yield from our farming and have very few people in there?
Very good. I think that, it's all in technology. That's where I'll put it.
Okay.
I think if we're able to drive the technology, and I'm not talking just about IT systems or machinery only or whatever, but it's a broad spectrum way of looking at technology. We all know what in the developed worlds they can do. Everything from even seed development, improve seeds, availability of the right fertilizers, organic, inorganic, the right chemicals, the agricultural colleges, linking what they teach in the colleges to what really happens on the ground and all of that. If you put all of it together and you want to call it technology, I believe that if, as a country, we can begin to think of this, have the right people sit down and plan where we start from, we will get somewhere. I'm aware that the current government is talking of a number of social interventions, PFJ, Planting for Food and Jobs. That it's laudable. If people were buying fertilizer at 100% of cost and they're getting it at 50% of cost, it's laudable. However, if the other linkages and the coordinating hands don't work properly, you will begin to even have our cheaper fertilizer relative to the neighboring countries beginning to flow out, and some of it is happening. Okay? It may not even go to the target. So there must be some coordinating hands looking at all of that. As part of the leg of the Planting for Food and Jobs, for instance, they're looking at quality maize, quality seed, the cereals and all of that, even vegetables. Yes. But if you planted the vegetables and if you didn't have even basic irrigation and the weather fails, you've lost it, no matter how qualitative that seed is. So it calls for some integrated approach. I'm aware, and I've heard government promise during the Farmers' Day in Tamale that we're going to get a lot more automated. We will be moving slightly away from the manual way of hoe and cutlass farming. Good news. I'm only hoping that there'll be a good start. But even when the machinery, the appropriate machinery have come in, I'm just hoping that policymakers and everybody who monitors and all the players, stakeholders, even outside government, because I mean, the whole lot of stakeholders in the agricultural sector. I mean, I was amazed at how many stakeholders, you know, international development organizations, the United Nations are interested in agriculture. If all the stakeholders will pull together and begin to make sure that all the other sides are properly integrated, then we'll begin to have the synergies. Otherwise, improved seeds, cheap fertilizer, so what? Ends there. The farmer cannot have access to the market, for example. After he's produced more, he's very going to curse somebody. So there should be an integrated approach, and I guess that is what is happening. I mean, you've had some good time out there in the developed world. I've been exposed. When I was running corporate and I was traveling in the developed world, even though I was running conferences and as to how to make the best chocolates and how to manage businesses better, or how to really manage in terms of governance, proper governance and controls. I also had an eye on how they were managing the agriculture. And what I learned from them was that it is, first of all, a very committed approach by government in terms of kicking in subsidies at the right time. But over and above everything, there is an integrated approach. I know of some farmers in this country who have thought that the way out is to go for big machinery only, big combined harvesters. In no time, some of these harvesters break down. And the reason is that we do not have enough coordination. Most of our efforts are not integrated. There is too much silo sitting in our country. And this is what corporate, international global corporate frowns upon. There's no space for silo setting. You've got to come on board. But people don't just come on board on their own volition. A hand must coordinate it. And I think that's one thing that I will recommend anytime I have the opportunity to talk to people in authority.
You know, you talked about how there's a need for integration. And when you look at the advanced economies, I mean, be it the presidency or the various agencies that are driving policy, that engage. Ever since you've been farming, has there been any concerted engagement where we're borrowing from your lessons or we're understanding where you are, so that when the subsidies are kicking in, they're not only coming at the right time, but they're going to the right places?
Yeah. I can see some improvement, and I will be very specific and give examples. Obviously, in the last 2 years that I've been on the farm, I've seen an upsurge of support and service from extension officers.
Okay.
I thought that they were a bunch of people in the agricultural sector who took salary for nothing. There are times that I'll go to my farm, and there are times that I'll drive past some farms, and I can see extension officers who would even go to the farms before the farmers are aware. So that's good news. I think one of the reasons is resourcing. I'm aware that government recently gave out about 3,000 motorbikes to make these guys, you know, motorable and mobile.
Yeah.
So I can see some improvement in that direction. Like I said, improved inputs, technology, and all of that. I was quite amazed at the number of initiatives that CSIR is even having with Agric Revolution for Africa, Kofi Annan's, There's a lot of work on the ground, and they're looking at all sorts of things. I mean, for example, I'm aware we were shown visibly and vividly that you can actually grow legumes, soya bean, and get 70% improvement in the yields year on year.
Wow.
You can, and they demonstrated that we saw it. How does this technology and knowledge get to that farmer so that we can begin to grow more than enough legumes and export? So that's really what I'm talking about. So there are little successes here and there. Sometimes even
you need the amalgamation.
Sometimes even big successes, and I think credit must be given when it is due.
Yeah.
And I can see some of these. It's a build-up. It's not just starting 2 years ago. There's a build-up, I guess, in terms of agricultural support over the last few years. But the amalgamation, as you said, the integration is what is not really happening at the right level.
If you had to paint a picture of what Ghana 15 years from now would look in terms of sustainability of agricultural sector, producing enough to feed us and lots to export, or even feed other people, like we used to once in a while get donations from other countries. With all of what 3 things do you think we must put in place to see that happen?
Okay. I think that I don't need to think so much outside the box. There are lessons, there are learnings. If the developed world, if big corporate have survived, over 100 years, and they've used certain platforms, and they've used some strategies, we can begin to think of running our country also as a business, because really that's what it is. Most of the things that corporate does, if we're thinking about welfare, corporate thinks about welfare of employees, similar. We do our budgets. Corporate does big-time budgeting and planning. So there's similarities. But what I think we need to do, as I said, is really to look at strong planning, which is not just planning in cold and putting it down, but planning and ensuring that the plan is functional. In the corporate world, we have something we call vision into action, and it is about translating the global vision into action in Ghana. So the guys in Atlanta, for say Coca-Cola, may have thought of this as a big-time vision for the next 50 years. How do you translate that into a plan, an operational plan in Ghana? I don't see why we cannot do that. So serious planning, attention to planning, which obviously would include monitoring, evaluation, and consequence management, as we have in the corporate world. If a sector doesn't perform, we question. And if we need to apply the right sanctions, let's put politics aside. We're thinking about the future of this country. Let's do that. Besides that, I can see some inroads into the systems and all of that. Government is trying to automate certain things, and they're working on some IT systems, and they're trying to push away a bit of manual. I think they're doing it in the right direction. There is no way that the developed world and the corporate world can work without the right IT infrastructure. So I think we're moving in the right direction, but we need to strengthen it and make sure that it does not sit in isolation. If we are automating, for example, acquisition of passports, and we're making it online, how are we relating it to other areas of the economy? Or even how is it well documented in terms of our national planning, the strategic plan for the next 5 years, 10 years, and maybe 15 years. So we need to look at that. And at the end of the day, I think that people make all the difference. It comes down to people. And this is where leadership comes in. And this is where performance management and all of that comes in. I still think that the platforms that corporate has used over the years, which are successful, looked at in another sense, should apply to this country. And if we are able to do this, of course, we have our own peculiarities, levels of literacy, levels of infrastructure, and all of that Yes, these are challenges. But if we begin to look at running the country along some of these lines, I believe that 15 years from now, we will get somewhere.
Fantastic. Well, I'd like to say a big thank you to you, Mr. James Boateng, National Best Farmer. Made full circle as a born and raised in Nkranza, comes to Accra, does very well, and then goes back home, and then you're still excelling. And I'm grateful for the lessons that you've shared with us today.
Thank you.
Here are my 5 takeouts from this conversation. And number 1 is that pay attention to the little things. That if walking into a room and forgetting to greet the panel could cost you your first opportunity at going to secondary school, you can imagine if you were walking into a room to face investors who can turn around your life. Number 2 is that learn. Learn and leverage the learning. The farm has been operational for 18 years. There were times where there was nothing being planted except trees. And that was from the lessons that James had learned in sustainability form the corporate world. So you can borrow things from various places, best practices, and leverage it. Number 3, you must be guided by values. How many times have you not heard a guest on this show talking about values, but not as quite articulated, that the values that we've had as a society, the home sense, to call it that, the things that says what is not yours cannot be appropriated without the permission and knowledge of the other. Honesty, respect for your elders, respect for the next person's space. These are values that made Ghana great. But today, we seem to have been departing from it. It's not too late to go back to that. Number 4 is leveraging, or rather connecting to people. Synergy. Now, being a top-flying executive, he recognized that he couldn't run the 2 lives of a farmer and a corporate executive at the same time. But he found synergies in people who were trained and skilled to do a great, and brought them in and gave them the room to perform. 2 years only after returning to directly being engaged and involved in the farm, he's been adjudged Best Farm of the Year. And the final thing I'm walking away from this is that our lives are only meaningful when they affect the people around us. It's just interesting that we're filming from the Kwame Nkrumah suite at the Villa Monticello. But that, if you'd remember, he says our independence was meaningless until unless it affected that of the entire continent. So James has built a school on the farm that has enrolled lots of children and given them education. He's not only farming and making a living for himself, but he's improving the lives around him on that farm and in that part of the country. So your life is only useful when it's useful to others. These are lessons I've learned. I'm sure you've learned a lot of your own. You can tweet at me at GHRainmaker if you have some thoughts you'd like to share from this episode. Until then, from the Kwame Nkrumah suite at Villa Monticello, I say go forward, make rain, shalom. Is this something you learned? Were you born an entrepreneur?
You got to start small.
I have not allowed being a woman to hold me back.
Credibility is not just making money, it's about making sure that people trust what you're doing.
Law practice is not only about going to court, it's about advice.
It's very difficult to hire somebody who's not motivated and then make them motivated.
One of the things that I'm known for is integrity.
They have to see you as a person of integrity.
Welcome to the Executive Lounge. I'm Inshira Ado.